Hello guys, welcome back. This is the second video for the lecture on qualitative data analysis. And in this video, we are going to look at some guiding principles for your data analysis if you're having qualitative data with you. Okay, before I talk about the principles, I would like to bring up or recap on the two dimensions of data analysis. Well, in our lecture on qualitative data analysis, we have compared the differences between the quantitative methodology and qualitative methodology, isn't it? So for these two methodologies, one is more structured and one is less structured. Well, as here, I want to readdress that for qualitative data itself, we could also have more structured data or less structured data. Although all qualitative data are less structured compared with quantitative data, but within the qualitative data domain, we still have this less or more structured format. And also, we have another dimension which when we are analyzing our data, whether we rely more on the interpretation from the researcher or we rely more on some rules or standards, some standards that we want to follow. Rules could be things like existing literature. For example, if you're studying a topic on gender equality, and you could be analyzing your data based on the theories on gender equality. So though by doing that, you are kind of rely on the rules on gender equality or rely on the theories on gender equality to some extent. Of course, we are not totally relying on the theories when we are doing qualitative data analysis. Well, compared with quantitative data analysis, we are less relying on the rules. We're being more subjective. And in terms of inductive and deductive, we also have talked about these this pair of concepts in the qualitative data collection lecture. If you forget about this pair of concepts, please refer back to my video on qualitative data collection. Well, let's hear again. Usually compared with quantitative data analysis, qualitative data are more inductive, but within the qualitative data, we could analyze it in a more inductive way or in a more deductive way, or we could even combine them somehow, somewhere in the middle between the two dimensions. So by using different techniques in your data analysis, we are trying to draw some balance between each of these dimensions, whether we are going more structured or less structured or somewhere in the middle, you know, and how much we would rely on existing literature to analyze the data, and how inductive we want to be or how deductive we want to be. These are some dilemmas that we need to think about when we are analyzing our data. And there's no fixed rule of like you have to follow this or you have to follow that. We are trying to be objective in our data analysis process, but later when I will talk about it, a concept called reflexive objective. So we can try to reach some systematic or objective design of the data analysis process by being reflective. All right, a very, very famous theory that we use, that social researchers would use in their research is the grounded theory. And this, I read a study which calls out many researchers around the world on the researchers on social sciences, different disciplines of social sciences, like including business and psychology and law or education, etc. So around the world on how they analyze their qualitative data, and more than half of the researchers reported that they have used the grounded theory, or they have followed the principles from grounded theory. So this theory is the most popular theory or dominant theory, which has been used by qualitative researchers. So if you want to conduct a research by using the qualitative methodology, and if you don't know this theory before, I would strongly recommend you to dig it up. And if you have no idea what it is, of course, you could start learning from this lecture, and also you can start reading. And if not from the textbooks, textbooks are very, very good for you to start with. Or if you want a more leisure starting point, you can even just read the Wikipedia on what grounded theory is, or even watch a few YouTube videos or any other platforms that you can get access to get a basic understanding of grounded theory, and then some complicated and stuff behind grounded theory as well. So today I am going to talk about it. So grounded theory basically means that you try to build up a theory from the ground. So that's the kind of a literal meaning of a grounded theory. So what does that mean? One of the popular way to do grounded theory is that when you do not have much existing theory to guide you, it doesn't have to be, but that this is quite common, that when you do not have much theory, pre-existing theory to guide you, and you try to rely on your informants. Let's say if you are doing interviews, you rely on your interviewees, what they say. So depending on what they say, you try to build up a theory purely based on what they say. But that doesn't have to be the case, but this is very common. And so what you are doing there is you try to build up a theory from the ground. The ground there is from your informants or from any other source of qualitative data. Or it could be, it doesn't have to be from your informants. It could be from company documents. So any source of data that you have. And then you try to categorize your data. So categorizing is very much used. It very much used the word that you can find in the grounded theory, which we try to put the very detailed data, try to summarize them into categories. Okay, so we can develop some codes. So the codes represent some, the code could cover and meaning from your informants or from other source of data that you have. And we are trying to do this level by level. Well, later we will talk about the coding process, and you would learn more about it later. And so basically here is that we try to categorize our data. So instead of having word by word by word by word, which your interview transcript will be in that format, and we try to emerge key message from those words or from those sentences, and put them as a code. Okay, so that one code could be one category. And again, so as the process of the categorizing goes up, you would emerge some key themes or patterns from your categories or codes. Okay, and by that way, you can develop or emerge a theory, and that is a inductive reasoning process. So from specific text and codes to a more general theory. Okay, that's the inductive process. All right, so the qualitative data analysis is a dynamic process. It's more dynamic compared with quantitative data analysis, which you already have preset rules to follow, and you already probably have assumptions on what you will get out of your data. Whereas in qualitative data analysis procedure, it is a more dynamic process, and it's hard to predict what your interviewees may say before your data collection. And in this dynamic process, quite often, you may have a blended experience between data collection and the data analysis, especially when we compare it with quantitative data analysis process. Well, as for quantitative research, you would usually finish up the whole data collection process, and then you would do the data analysis processes. Data collection and data analysis are two kind of separate procedures, whereas for qualitative research, in some occasions you could quite intertwine them to each other. You could start your qualitative data collection process by start to interview in your participant, and then after one or two or more interviews, you would probably start to do your data analysis. You try to analyze the data from the first couple of interviews you've done, and then based on the analysis that you have done from the first couple of interviews, you realize that you probably need to ask more questions on a certain part of your interview. Then you would probably change or modify your interview questions based on the analysis you've done. And so in the next couple of interviews that you would do, you may change your questions, or you may modify your questions, or you may even change your research directions. And so you can see that the data collection and the data analysis processes could be interacted to each other, and when you are doing an qualitative research. So they don't have to be two separate process. They could happen one to the other. This is especially the case when you are using theoretical sampling. Okay, theoretical sampling. In our lecture on qualitative data collection, we have introduced the two sampling strategies in the third part of the lecture. One is purposive sampling, one is theoretical sampling. So purposive sampling, it's all right that you probably would have the data collection and data analysis procedures separately, whereas if you are following a theoretical sampling strategy, quite commonly you would have the two processes spontaneously. By spontaneously, I mean, like take turns to have the data collection and data analysis procedures. This is because when you are following a theoretical sampling process, you would keep modifying your samples. You would keep modifying probably your interview questions as you go along, as you analyze your data and you realize that you want to expand on a particular point, or you want to add a few questions on the new area that you feel you should be doing. Okay, and I want to talk about an example. Talk about an example. So let's assume you want to study harassment at workplace. And so at the beginning, you assume that maybe young ladies, young famous female workers, female workers in their 20s would be the most influenced group on harassment. Whereas you started a few interviews with female workers who are in their 20s. And as the interview goes on, quite a number of them may mention about their colleagues' experience on harassment, and their colleagues are probably in their 30s or in their 40s. Let's just put it in a simple way, in their 30s. Okay, and if quite a number of your interviewees who are in their 20s reported that they heard about some harassment experience from their colleagues who are in their 30s, you probably realize that you should interview female workers in their 30s. By that way, you are actually changing or expanding your research samples, isn't it? So, because at the beginning, in your research design, your samples are female workers in their 20s. And as your interviews go on, you realize that you probably need to shifted your direction a little bit or expand your research samples to people who are in their 30s. So that is an example of what you may experience in a theoretical sampling strategy. Okay. And by doing that, you are kind of experiencing the data collection process and the data analysis process kind of one after another and again. So you are taking them interchangeably. Okay. So it could be a very dynamic process. And another important point that I want to introduce here is called reflexive objectivity. I briefly mentioned this a couple of minutes ago. Reflexive objectivity. Well, this is again related to one of the concepts that we mentioned in the qualitative data collection lecture, which is on rigor. I hope you still remember that term, rigor. So for rigor, it refers that well, although qualitative methodology is more subjective than quantitative methodology, we still should aim for some objectivity, or try to aim for some level of systematic systematic design or systematic analysis. We try to make things explicit rather than implicit. Well, how to do that? Reflexive objectivity would be one way to do it. It means that so instead of purely just rely on our own sense of feeling that we just want to conduct interviews in that way. We just want to analyze our interview data in that way. We try to be as reflective as possible as a researcher. We try to reflect on how we collect our data and how we analyze our data, how we make codes, how we emerge themes. Okay, so by being reflective in a regular basis, we could reach to a certain level of objectivity. I know it is still probably not as objective as those ones who are doing quantitative research, but still it's better than nothing. It's better than not being reflective at all. Okay, so some implications for qualitative researchers, especially if you are following a theoretical sampling strategy, is that we should leave time between the interviews. So you know that by analyzing the first couple of interviews, you may change your interview questions, or you may change your research samples, etc. So you should leave some time between your interviews so that you have enough time to analyze the data from the first couple of interviews. Okay, try to see the pattern emerging from your qualitative data. And also it would give you some time to review whether the sample that you set up initially would actually work, and or whether they are the best set of samples to fit your research. Okay. Right. And in the next part, and well, in this slide, this part is being more kind of academic, being more kind of critical. If you are a practical kind of learner, you could focus more on what have been discussed in previously. Well, I would recommend you to also know some bit of some debates, some academical debates, and these are quite theoretical, but I think at a postgraduate level, since you are doing a master's degree here, at postgraduate level, you should get into certain depths of academic debate or theoretical debate. All right, about grounded theory. The first group of debate that I want to introduce to you is whether theory can be grounded. Well, for grounded theory, we don't have a fixed rule on how grounded theory is formed, or how we can follow the grounded theory. There are two main arguments around the grounded theory. One is that grounded theory is more like a blank slate. Okay. I'm not sure whether blank slate would make sense to you, this expression. I would explain it now. Blank slate here refers to when we have nothing to follow, no theory to follow, when we are using the grounded theory. So for example, when you are conducting a research and you realize that there is not much theory on the topic that you want to look at. Especially when your research scope is very, very narrow, it's possible that there's not much theory going on, not much research which has been done in the previous have actually covered that. So in that scenario, you conduct your research, you have collected some data, and you try to develop a theory from your data. And that is one way of following grounded theory, when you do not have much theoretical guidance or no theoretical guidance at all. Okay, so that is the blank slate status. That is, so in that scenario, scholars would argue that we probably do not have the theory to inform our sample or inform how we interview, the questions that we can use in the interviews. The other side of the debate is that it is almost impossible to have no theory to guide at all. We always could have some theory to follow, and following existing theory is very essential. So even if we do not have theory to follow on the particular scope that your research wants to focus, you could probably borrow some theories from a similar discipline. For example, if you want to look at your research on, let's say, gender discrimination on a particular social group in a particular country, in a particular industry, and under a particular age group, and whose employment type is like temporarily or agent workers, well, to a particular occupation, maybe like Uber drivers. Okay, anyway, so there may not be a theory, which has actually looked at such narrow scope as your research would look at, but there must be theories which look at gender discrimination in general, isn't it? If it's not studying in your country of interest, it could be theories which have looked at other countries or other industries, other sectors, other occupation groups, other job titles, employment type, etc. So it's impossible to have no theory at all to guide. And they also address the importance of following the existing theory, to somehow following it. Okay, but for grounded theory, we do not usually use much theory at the very beginning when we are doing the data analysis. It is usually after we have some open codes, we could bring some theories in. Okay. Some critiques on grounded theory. Grounded theory is very time consuming, yes, because when we are using grounded theory, we tend to be as open as possible. We tend to be as informal as possible, as unstructured as possible when we are collecting our data. And when we are analyzing our data, we try to keep an open mind as much as possible. And by doing that, that is very time consuming, because that means that we have less to follow, less standards to follow. We need to use our own brain to generate patterns, etc. So yeah, it is very time consuming, and each researcher may use their own instincts to generate patterns. And if we have another researcher who conduct the same research, may generate different codes or different themes, have I shouldn't say different findings, but they are different findings in some way, to some extent. In such a scenario, the findings from this researcher could be very hard to be generalized or to be applied to a wider context or to another researcher. So these are some critiques on using grounding theory. Okay, I think that's it for this part. In our next part, I'm going to give you more kind of a practical element of data analysis, where I would introduce how to actually code. Coding is the most important procedure in qualitative data analysis, and I will introduce how to code in the next video. And also I will introduce one of the analytical tools called NVivo to you guys. All right, I will see you guys in the next video.